Which cards from Lord of the Rings should be added to the Vintage Cube? I have found 10 cards, and I've separated them in 2 categories. The top 3 are cards I think are going to be added to the Vintage Cube and be there to stay, so they're going to be there for probably the rest of time. And the other 7 are cards that have some potential and may go in and out, depending on how good they are. But first, let me talk about some cards that I don't think should be added to the cube. First one is Stern Scolding, blue mana, counter target creature spell with power or toughness 2 or less. And Essence Scat has never been particularly good in Vintage Cube. I don't think we ever had one. They are more for the modern cube. And while it's good that this is 1 mana, it doesn't counter enough relevant stuff. So no to that card. Rally of the Hornbrand also don't think it's going to end up going into the cube. 1 and a red for a sorcery, create 2/1/1 humans, and humans you control gain haste. I don't think this card is that much better than a 2/2 with haste for 2, so like a Bloodthirsty Adversary or Feldon. I don't think there are humans, and sometimes giving them haste could be powerful. I just don't think this is that much better. Witch King of Angmar is a powerful card. We wrap back for a 5/3. It has a lot of abilities. Basically, whenever something deals damage to you in combat, the person has to sacrifice a permanent, and the ring tempts you, and you can discard a card to make it indestructible. I just don't know what kind of deck wants this card. It seems out of place. You don't really want it in a Reanimator deck because it isn't powerful enough, and 5 mana is too expensive to hard cost. It does some nice stuff, but I don't think it's gonna end up being good. We have 5 of lands, all that they require you to have a legendary creature for them to come into play untapped, and they do some good stuff. I have 1 on the list, but I've excluded most of them. I only think it's 1 of them who is good enough. Alright, so let's think about which cards are gonna see play. And the first, number 10, is kind of my own candidate for a card that has potential and looks very fun. I'm very skeptical that it's going to be powerful enough, and that is Hugh the Entwood. 3 red for a sorcery, and you sacrifice any number of lands, and then you reveal that many cards from the top of your library, and you put all artifacts into play and all lands into play tapped, and then the rest goes on the bottom. I think this card could be a fun build around with in an artifact deck. Let's say you're playing this Workshop Solarian Academy deck with basically like 20 artifacts, maybe some other spells, and 17 lands. Then I think this card has a lot of potential because you could hit like a Sundering Titan, Blightsteel Colossus, Wormcoil Engine, and you also are digging towards some of the more powerful lands. Like you can play Sheldock Isle, because while the cards go on the bottom, you are clearing away 5 cards from the top of your deck. One thing that makes this card not so good is that it's not very good with rituals or artifact mana, because you have to sacrifice a lot of lands to get a desirable effect. So if you like power this out with a ritual and cast it on turn 3, you can only sacrifice 3 lands, which means you're gonna hit less. One nice thing about this is that if your opponent counters it, you don't have to sacrifice anything. So this is a fun one. I think it could be fun to try, Hugh the Entwood. But it's also not a card that I would like to first pick. I would like to get it late when I'm already in like blue-red artifacts. And then I think it could do some nice things. Number 9 is Saruman's Trickery. 1 blue, counter target spell and amass orcs 1. And this is basically a Mystic Snake, except it's a 1 instead of a 2/2. But it's not green. Mystic Snake hasn't been in the Vintage Group for a long time. It's just too hard to cast and it's not powerful enough. But this one shaves off the green cost. You can just play it in any blue deck, and I think it's going to be reasonable. 3 mana counterspell and make a 1/1. The 1/1 can protect your planeswalkers by jumping. You can maybe combine the 1/1 with an opposition type effect. At the end of the day, this is a card that's you can kind of take it or leave it. We have cards like Dissolve, Dissipate, and this is not that much better or worse than those cards. So even though I think that Saruman's Trickery might have a home in the Vintage Cube, it's also the kind of card that it doesn't really matter that much if it's in the cube or not. But I think it could be a potentially decent card. We've seen how good Venser is, and this is different from Venser. Venser could also bounce permanents. And it's a 2/2 for 4, but this one permanently deals with something, and it feels a little bit like a 2 for 1 on a counter spell, so I think this has potential. Number 8, we have Moria Marauder, and it's red for a 1/1 double strike. Whenever a goblin or orc deals combat damage to a player, exile the top card of your library, you may play it this turn, and this is of course a goblin. So I'm not looking to play this in a tribal deck, I'm looking for mono red. And in mono red, this has kind of like nice things. It's like a 2/1 for 2 because it has double strike. Plays pretty good with pump spells. And if you get to hit your opponent, you get to draw 2 cards. What I'm seeing at this card is, in some matchups it's kind of whatever. But if you're playing against Storm or a controller that doesn't have an early play, this card could just run away with the game. Because on turn 3 you can clear like a land and a cheap card, because mono red almost always plays cheap cards. So I think this card has potential, and I wouldn't be sad to see this get a try in the Vintage Cube. I'm not looking to combine it, as I said, with a bunch of goblins, but this one has my attention. Number 7, we have another card that could be good in mono red, and that's Fiery Inscription. 2 red for an enchantment. When it comes to play, the ring tempts you, which is an ability that I don't think is going to play great in the Vintage Cube, because you're not going to have too many ring tempt cards, so it's basically just going to give a creature Skulk. But when you cast an instant or sorcery spell, this card deals 2 damage to your opponent. So this is like a Gutter Snipe, but it's an enchantment. And enchantment is one of the hardest card types in the Vintage Cube to deal with. Artifact is not that hard because you have a Braid, you have that Fade, and a lot of cards destroys artifact, but enchantments is a little trickier. So this might be a little bit of a sleeper. I also like the fact that giving something like a Monastery Swiftspear Skulk, because it's a 1/2 naturally, and when you cast it in, you can attack with Swiftspear. Maybe it actually helps it get through. And then you cast your instant and sorcery, deal 2, and Monastery Swiftspear deals an extra 1. So it's almost like it dealt 3 damage at that point. So not a super important card. But this card could maybe enable you to go into more of like a burn style strategy. So mono red mostly is like an aggressive deck with cheap creature. But this one could open up the doors to play with some sort of more like a burn style of deck. Which the problem, of course, is that you're not going to have this card in your hand every time. But this card, it has a little bit of my attention. Alright, so at number 6 we have the land I was talking about, and that is the only land of the cycle I think is going to see some play in Vintage Cube, and that is Minas Tirith. This is a land that taps for white. It enters battlefield tapped unless you control a legendary creature. But when you pay 1 and a white and tap it, you can draw a card, but you can do this if you have attacked with 2 creatures. So first of all, white has a reasonable amount of legends. You have Thalia, Adeline. Adeline is a very good card, but by the way, I'm going to get to that in a second. You have Lauren of the Third Path. And also it's a card you can sneak in early, even if it comes into play tap. But with Adeline especially, first of all, it's a legend that makes this come into play untapped. Let's say on turn 4, you can cast Wandering Emperor or Armageddon if you so decide, which takes away the drawing of a card. But Adeline by itself, the way this card is worded is that you can actually just have Adeline in play as your only creature, attack, and then you get to draw a card because you only have to have attacked with 2 creatures. But this is a land that could be really good in some matchups for mono white. I'm not talking against mono red or Storm because they usually don't have time to durl around. But we're playing as a control deck. Mono white is actually a deck that can slow roll their creature reasonably well, because a lot of the creatures in white has value when they come into play, and this is a card that can help you grind through by not overcommitting to the board, play some threats or some cards. So while I don't think this is going to be a super powerful land like Caracas is, I think that this card could actually have a home. Just the thing is, do you have slots in your cube for a kind of card like this? Number 4 is Spiteful Banditry. X red, and it deals X damage to each creature when it comes into play. And whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you get a treasure token, and you only get that once per turn. So I kind of like this as a sweeper that gives you a little bit of extra value. Because I can see myself in a blue-red deck that has some artifacts they want to sacrifice. You can maybe have a Tinker in there, and this is another way to get an expendable artifact. You may just want to cast some big cards like Inferno Titan. This card looks kind of good with Inferno Titan because both this card and the treasure it makes helps you cast Inferno Titan. And then Inferno Titan is going to give you some treasures on top of that probably. So it is expensive though. So red has had some sweepers in the cube like Anger of the Gods, Sweltering Suns, Brotherhood's End. They almost never are excellent, but they have some place. This card is a little more of a swingy card. It's more expensive, but it also does more when it's in play. And it can also be sort of like an engine. When you have this in play, combine it with removal spells, or you can get some extra treasure, make you double spell. Yeah, I can see this card being pretty good. Alright, so now we have the last of the cards, which I think are cards that can get in there, be tried out, and maybe be good or maybe not. And that is Elven Chorus. 3 and a green for enchantments. And creatures you control can tap to add 1 mana of any color. Okay, we've seen this card before, so I crypted it right. That's not particularly good even in the Vintage Cube, but it has sort of like a Oracle of Mul Daya ability for creatures. So you can look at the top card of your library anytime, and you can play creatures from the top of your library. So obviously I'm thinking mono green here. Maybe like a blue-green opposition deck with a heavy amount of creatures could also be good. But this is like a very good fit for mono green, and this I think is a card that could become a cube staple. It's great against control, because as I said before, enchantments are hard to deal with most of the time. And this one makes you get extra cards from the top of your deck. It also means that a lot of your green card actually creates tokens that are somewhat expendable. Like this card with Deranged Hermit is a pretty powerful combo. You have Garruk Relentless, which creates wolves. Of course, Garruk Relentless can't be cast from the top of your deck, which is another thing in favor of Deranged Hermit. But the point is, you can often create a lot of small creatures. You also have Sakura Tribal. You can tap Sakura for mana and then sack it, get a mana the turn, and a little extra mana boost there. Of course, you can't tap these creatures while you're summoning Sickness. But anyway, there's also Whisperwood Elemental and what's it called? Avenger of Zendikar. So all those cards both creates creatures and are creatures you can cast on the top of your deck. So I think this could very potentially become a green staple. Of course, mono green has its problems in the cube, but I think I am a little bit of a believer in mono green Vintage Cube, often because it's so open, and I can very much see this card being a very good card against most decks. Really power out stuff, draw extra cards from the top of your deck. Could be better than Harmonize, for example. Alright, so now we have the top 3, and these 3 cards are gonna be staples in the Vintage Cube from now on. I think they're gonna enter the cube, and they're probably not gonna leave for a very long time. At number 3, we have the One Ring. And you may be a little surprised that it's not higher, but I think it's actually the weakest of these 3 cards. This is a 4-mana artifact that is indestructible. That is important, because there's a lot of artifact destruction in the deck, and this can't be touched by a Braid. It can be touched by Dack Fayden, but more of that later. But when it comes to play, you can protect from everything until the end of your next turn. So that means that you can't get Tendrils or Brain Freezed, can't get Thought Seized, can't be dealt damage by like mono red or mono white creatures. And of a little small note, you can't target yourself with card or spell. So if you have an Ancestor, maybe you have 5 mana, just drew Ancestral for the turn. You want to cast the One Ring and Ancestral yourself, you have to Ancestral yourself before the One Ring. But that's not a big deal. The fact is, but remember, you can't target yourself. So maybe you want to Dack Fayden yourself before casting the One Ring. Anyway, it also taps to add a bird encounter on it, and then you draw a card for each bird encounter on it. And on your upkeep, you lose 1 life for each bird encounter on it. This is a card when you play it, you're pretty much invulnerable. Your opponent can still cast cards, activate Planeswalkers, assuming they don't target you, and attack. Remember also that your opponent can attack your Planeswalkers after you cast the One Ring. But you're invulnerable. It's almost impossible to get killed after you've been casting this. Maybe your opponent manages to get some engine that kills you, but anyway. So you are probably going to gain some life by casting this card because your opponents can't attack you. So that makes up a little bit for the life loss. And then you can start drawing cards very early. If you're playing as another controller can manage to resolve this and it goes unchecked, you almost always wins. It's my experience from playing in standard with when one player has the one ring and the other one hasn't. You can usually maneuver around so that you can draw a lot of extra cards, and then eventually you either get rid of the one ring or kill your opponent before the life loss matters. So Indestructible is nice as well. So I think this card is a little slow, but I like it. The only problem is this better reverse in Cursive Portal? Because Cursive Portal lets you draw an extra card every turn without life loss. You don't have to worry about activating it, because if you want to draw extra card from this, you have to spend the life at some way. And Cursive Portal can do that without costing you any life. This card is indestructible, which matters. You may draw the card faster than Cursive Portal, and you also have the effect of giving yourself protection. So I think the one ring is going to be a staple, but is it an auto included in every deck? That I'm not so sure about. Let's say you're playing a Storm deck. Is this card that good? It buys you time, but it draws you cards at a worse rate usually than a card like Cursive Portal. So it remains to be seen. I don't see how this card ever going to leave the cube when it's going to be good. Number 2, we have Orcish Bowmasters. 1 and a black for a 1/1 with flash. And when it ends the battle, you create a 1/1, or you are mass 1, I should say, and deal your opponent 1 damage. But you also do that when your opponent draws a card except the first one. So I love the Orcish Bowmasters. I think it's great in every matchup. If you're playing as an aggressive deck, this is a 2 1/1s plus a ping, and that's usually enough to take care of a lot of stuff. You can kill Talias, you can kill Ragavans, you can maybe deal 1 damage to a 2 toughness creature and then block with a 1/1. But against a control deck, you're going to get a lot of value from the second ability. It's going to grow your army or replace it if it dies. And your opponent's going to be dealt a lot of damage. Even if you're playing against Storm, imagine Storm deck casting Time Twister. You're going to take 7 damage if Orcish Bowmasters is into play. Anytime your opponent wants to draw extra cards, basically, Orcish Bowmasters is going to punish you. And if you're playing a Storm deck, you might sometimes lock them out from casting extra card or spells. This is not like a Narset, of course, but it's much cheaper, and it's in a color which doesn't have this type of effect. So I actually love Orcish Bowmasters Vintage Cube. Black has had some issues in the cube not being good enough, and I think Orcish Bowmasters might actually give Black a nice push. It's going to be a great card. I think it's great in every matchup. It's good against aggressive decks. As I said, it's good against control decks. It's good against Storm deck most of the time, because most Storm decks are drawing extra card in some way, where it's Time Spiral, Time Twister. They are playing cards like First for Discovery, Gitaxian Probe, and it's gonna be taxing, to say the least. And it's all just on a 2-mana card, so it's so cheap and good. Alright, so number 1 is a card I think I'm gonna be a staple from now on in the Vintage Cube. That is, of course, Reprieve. 1 and a white for an instant. Return target spell to its owner's hand. Draw a card. So it's basically a white remand. It doesn't have to counter the spell, so that might matter for some cards. I guess it's worse with Baral. But on the other hand, this card could work against some uncounterable cards. I'm not sure how many uncounterable cards there are in the cube. I think Hullbreaker Horror got removed. And you couldn't remand Hullbreaker Horror, but you could reprieve it if you want. So this is going to be a good card in mono white, because as you know, Vintage Cube often is about casting a huge card, and reprieving that just is insane. If you're casting like a 5-mana Planeswalker and your mono white deck can reprieve it. And sometimes you want to play around mana type, so you're playing 4 mana for your big Jace the Mind Sculptor, playing around mana type on turn 5. and your opponent reprieves it, or your opponent casts Fractured Identity on turn 6, reprieve it. And it's also going to be great in blue-white control. I mean, blue-white is a card that decks that absolutely love reprieve too, because you're probably up on mana and on tempo, and you get to dig deeper into your deck. It's fine play on turn 2. It's not at its best on turn 2, but it's a fine thing to do on your 2/2. It's much better on turn 2 in blue-white control than it is on mono-white. In mono-white, you want to develop your board first. But yeah, this card is great. So it's a little worse than Remand because of the color it's in combining it with Storm cards. So the classic combo is to Remand your own Brain Freeze, and you get to cast it again. You get even more Storm. Storm deck usually don't play white, but it gives a nice interactive tool to all white decks. I think mono-white, blue-white control. Yeah, maybe every now and then people are playing black-white. Maybe the Bowmasters can make that even better. I usually not a believer in black-white, but you do have powerful cards. And I think Reprieve is just such a great tool. Because I've been a believer in Mana Type in mono-white for a long time. It's just that you don't expect it when you're playing against white decks. You are expecting that your thing's gonna resolve, and then out of nowhere your opponent gets reprieve your thing. Alright, so which cards do you think are gonna get added to the Vintage Cube? I have the top 3 Reprieve, Orcish Bowmasters, and the One Ring as gonna go into the cube and probably never leave. And I have the bottom 7. Elven Chorus, Minas Tirith, Spiritual Vanity, Huda Input, Saramas Trickery, Moria Marauder, and Fire Inscription. They might go into the cube, but they may leave very soon after the first update.